do you want to win? Well, yeah, Sarah, I want to win. Take the thinking out of drinking. I'm thirsty. I'm dying. We were trying to solve a real problem.
Oh my God, this is brilliant. Like how has no one else came up with this?
Let me tell you about why water is important.
All right, guys, welcome back to Built in America. We have Sara Blackmer, who's built an awesome company. She's helping athletes behind the helmet stay hydrated. Sara, great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm really happy to be here.
So Sara, tell me a little about your company today. I'm very curious. You built an awesome company that really helps high-intense athletes hydrate properly. I want to know why you built that.
Yeah, so I got a very fun nugget of goodness as a starting place for this and really did some leapfrogging, leveraging some original technology on active hydration. That's our proprietary technology, active hydration. But we're a human performance company. And we focus around making sure that humans, right now we're focused really on the athlete side, but humans in general are able to operate in whatever mission set or activity that they're doing at their peak performance, both cognitively and physically. And really think that there's a lot of opportunity to, help people be their best versions of themselves. And really excited by what we're able to do.
Where did the name FluidLogic come from?
Yeah, so we thought that our co-founder, who's also our chief design officer, Rob Stahl, really liked the idea of the intelligence behind the system, which sort of speaks to the logic piece. Obviously, we're moving fluids, whether that's air or water, with our connectors and with our system. So fluid, there is a quick connect, disconnect that's very intuitive and obvious. It's logical on how you use this. We want things to be really simple. So just a couple of play on words that we thought was, kind of killer.
I like that. Before I dive into FluidLogic, I'm always really curious on how you actually got to where you're at today. You've obviously had a really interesting career, having an MBA. You were a marine engineer. You served in the Air Force, I believe, as well. How does all of that then translate to what you're doing today?
So I am an epic tech nerd.
There you go.
And I think that goes back to my engineering roots. I am a Wolverine from the University of Michigan and just really love everything advanced technology. But what I discovered very early on in my career is that I'm much better at interacting and driving execution with teams than I am being behind the computer, really designing or coding or developing, on the more traditional hard skills engineering side. And so that led me to explore how do I really move forward on a path on the business side. I was a military officer at the time. Aircraft maintenance was my job. So, leading teams that were fixing fighter jets, super cool. One of the best jobs that I've ever had. Loved being a maintainer, loved my teams of really talented maintainers. Fantastic. So that was really kind of this technology geeking outside. But I really liked the team leading part and the idea of, how could I do that in a corporate world as I was leaving the military's active duty. I stayed in the reserves for 20 years, but then I was a citizen airman working both on the commercial and defense side. And I said, an MBA is going to do me really in good stead. So let me go do that. I went to the Kelley School of Business. I also did a MS in Global Supply Chain Management because in the Air Force, a maintenance officer is a logistics officer. And so I thought about sort of doubling down on my career just a little bit. And the equivalent to that on the civilian side is supply chain management. They're not quite the same how they execute on the defense side and commercially, but it was a really, great exposure for me. But what I think that it taught me was how to communicate really well across teams. So how do I understand key business objectives and metrics that we need to accomplish, but then translate that value and or needs to the technical team? And how do I take the constraints and issues and concerns from the technical team and translate that to the business leaders to really understand limitations or change in direction or resource constraints or things like that? So I really became, I think, a glorified translator. I'm still very technically minded, but I always have my eye on the prize. So I have this great combination, of a business mindset, but with a little bit of, technology geeking out.
I love that. I actually have a global supply chain background in MS as well. So I thought I was one of the only ones out there. So I'm glad we share that same resonance.
That is, Sam, I love it. That's a nice thing for us to share.
So you're solving big problems today. And I can tell why you're doing this based off your career with the Air Force. You're solving massive problems with large aircrafts. And then you saw a product market fit and a gap in the market, I should say, as well, with being able to hook a hose up to a water bottle, connect that to a helmet, and then allow people who do, race car motor vehicle, the race car space, high intense athletes behind bikes to go and make sure they're properly hydrated while they're performing. So I want to know where the product market fit came from. And then why this mechanism and this design?
Yeah. So first of all, really a convenient way to carry water. It doesn't have to be a water bottle. We've provided, water reservoirs that you can carry in. And that's part of our current system that we've just launched. But originally the idea is, any reservoir of water. It started in off-road desert motorcycle racing.
Okay.
And we said, and our team were all adventure sports enthusiasts, motorsports specifically, but just really into, moto and race. And how do I go really fast, really hard, really long? And the idea was, it's grueling conditions. It's just epically hot.
Yeah.
You get really dehydrated really fast. It's not an easy thing to be going at speed over this kind of terrain. So the idea of taking your eye off the ball or your hands off the, either steering wheel or in this case, the handlebars of a bike to be able to hydrate was just not something that happened. So you'd go miles and miles and miles, and then everybody would take a break and you would just be dying. And then to think that you had miles and miles to go again, so the Baja 1000 is really where the race where this idea formed about, oh my gosh, there has to be a better way. What we found then was there is in fact a better way. And it started with the convenience of how do I get water to my mouth in a hands-free fashion where I'm not distracted from my, activity or mission. And what it turned into is how do I know how and when to drink to truly stay optimally hydrated, not just to have an easy way to get water. So kind of ideated that way. But as we, iterated and really saw what was the pain point challenges that we were getting in the motorsport space, it was broader than just how do I get water to my mouth? And so we kind of went down that journey. Motorsports is a really exciting place to be. It's, again, an awesome proving grounds, really great on, environmental conditions are tough. It's got a huge cognitive and physical load. So you're, going 200 plus miles an hour with somebody going 200 plus miles an hour, 2 inches away from you, turning.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing to do. It's super intense. Physically, it's intense. Our athletes will lose 7 pounds or more of sweat during a 2-hour or longer engagement. There's just an intensity there. It's hot usually. You're doing this in southern places or you're doing it in summertime, when the season goes. And so, you'll have with solar load, anywhere between 100 and 130 degrees in the cockpit. You're wearing these full protective suits. So your fire suit plus a balaclava plus a helmet, and that then adds another couple of degrees. So it's just really intense. So that's awesome because you can't really come up with much more grueling conditions where to test and prove this out. But we knew that it's not really a scalable market. And so we said, okay, let's focus first on adjacency. Who are the people who really care about going hard, fast, long, and then recovering fast so that they can do it again? We were really thinking about, I love to say this all the time. I'm like, do you want to win? Well, yeah, Sarah, I want to win. Okay, then you need this. Not, let me tell you about why water is important.
I like that a lot.
And it's got this sort of shift. And so the markets that we're moving into really focus on that early adoption performance piece. Do you want to win? And whether that's competing against yourself, like I do now because I'm old, or whether it's, competing, in a real race or at an amateur level, or whether it's just wanting to make sure that you can continue to do your high-end, high-intensity activity over and over and over again by reducing recovery times. That's our thing. So we're motorsports and power sports shifted into adventure sports that really, with this last launch then of our product this week, which has been so exciting, is into, two-wheeled adventure. So think motocross, mountain biking, e-biking, that kind of a thing.
This is really cool. I've been to a few Baja 1000s and 5000s down in Mexico, and I have friends who drive those trophy trucks down there, and it's so intense, and they're sweating their ass off after, and they've said they lost 10 pounds, exactly like you said. And I never thought about, are they actually hydrating during the race, which is such a good point. And then when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Like how has no one else came up with this?
Well, it's not even just are they hydrating at all during the race? It's kind of how you're hydrating. And the traditional hydration methods right now are a squeezy bottle with a straw. And you're only doing that in a place where you think you can do it without basically, crashing and dying.
Yep.
So if I'm on a road track, then that's going to be on a straightaway. Maybe, there's a lot of, like I said before, cognitive load. So you're thinking about tons of things. The last thing that you're thinking about is, where do I find my water? So a lot of times it gets missed or skipped. But when we did our clinical trials, we saw this differentiation between how you consumed water. So over the course of the race, using our system or using that, squeezy bottle system, our athletes were consuming about the same amount of water. But the method within which they had it was so different. Like, I'm thirsty, I'm dying, I'm guzzling water. And so what happens is your body just doesn't have time to absorb that. And so our system helps take care of that problem for you.
So yeah, there's a direct relation to your performance based off of the timing of when you're drinking water as an athlete, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the motorsports use case, well, really, we think in any use case, the science behind active hydration is that you have continued hydration. So smaller bursts of water more often over time give your body a chance to absorb that. So imagine, that you have a medicine cup or a shot glass equivalent, which is about 30 milliliters of water. And you drink that, say, every 2 to 5 minutes over your activity. And so in the end, you're consuming the 16 ounces of water versus if you just guzzle 16 ounces of water, your body doesn't have time to absorb it. I like to use an analogy to a sponge on a table. And if you dump 16 ounces of water on a sponge, the sponge is going to absorb some, but most of it is just going to run off the table onto the floor. If you, in contrast, will dump this medicine cup and then wait 2 minutes and do it again and wait 2 minutes and do it again, you definitely get that same 16 ounces of water and it stays in the sponge. Your body is very similar in how it reacts to that. And so in the 16 ounce guzzling case, you're absorbing maybe an ounce or two, and the rest you're eliminating, when you go to the bathroom. Similarly to falling off the table onto the floor.
What kind of data are you guys measuring right now? So I saw a study that says 1% drop in hydration can cause 12% drop in performance. So I know you guys have an app I saw on the website, I believe, right? And then you're tracking that based off a wearable potentially. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so our system is a wearable, but it's not like a sensor. It's not a sensor wearable. So we're using personal demographic data right now. So, I'm a woman, I'm 48 years old. I'm going to go on a 2-hour hike. I weigh 140 pounds and it swizzles that and it says, well, where are you at? Like it pulls your location environmental data. And so, I'm in Louisville. And so it's in the summertime. So it's going to be 90 degrees and 85% humidity. And it says, okay, swizzles this with our proprietary hydration algorithms. And it says, Sarah, you're going to need to have, 18 milliliters every 1 minute and 57 seconds. And then this system, through haptic feedback on your chest, is going to prompt you when it's time to drink. You can push a Bluetooth trigger button right now that sits on your handlebars, or you can have it light up for you instead of have a haptic reminder. So it's time to drink. You push that trigger button and it will deliver water directly into your mouth. So there's no sucking required. There's no, finding where your hose is. There's none of that. And so our hydration algorithms are actually more effective by a considerable amount. So, we're in the 90% efficacy in terms of sweat replacement than any of the sweat sensors that exist right now. So we find that our math is really an exciting innovation that we've been able to do to sort of combat the need to have an invasive and or, one more wearable sensor. I do think that we will integrate, with sensors that are available to you that are commonly used right now in the fitness communities, like, Fitbits or Apple Watches or, Whoops or, pick a sensor or a wearable that you want that's giving you athletic or feedback about your heart rate and things like that.
Sarah, you've been out for 3 years now with FluidLogic, right? How do you get awareness around this product? Are you going direct to consumer? Are you guys going to a ton of events? How does the entire motocross industry, I should say, get a hold of FluidLogic?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'll tell you that one of my top challenges is exposure and awareness. So I love having this chat with you, Sam. Tell all your friends about FluidLogic. Our plan is to execute an influencer and affiliate strategy, but we're not looking for, a paid influencer whose job is to be an influencer. We're trying to find, top names and athletes in the sport that people respect and watch and pay attention to, who have an opportunity to use our system and say, oh my gosh, this is badass. This is changing my world. And then, they're willing to talk and post about that. From an affiliate strategy, we intend to do something similar, but really where, tell your friend and your friend gets a deal and you get a deal too. And the idea behind that really, Sam, is that so far, everyone who has used our system has never wanted to not use it again. It really makes a difference. The convenience of where, you can have a trigger, this sort of push to drink concept, the idea of a reminder that you need to drink, the fact that you don't have to suck on something, that it just, squirts the water directly into your mouth. These are all things that are just, blowing people's minds. And I think in the end, it's the how you feel at the end of whatever your activity is. And bottom line, people are feeling fantastic. Like they're doing these grueling things where, they'll lose, just like you said, your buddies, like 10 pounds of sweat. But then they're ready to jump off their bike and say, I could run a 10K, say. I couldn't believe it when one of our users said that. It was like wild to me. I was like, dude, don't you need to go take a nap? And he goes, no, I'm ready to go. Let's get to your run. And I said, well, that's just awesome. And so we think by trying to do this word of mouth strategy that really leverages the fact that users get very passionate about having used it, and then sharing that is going to be much more effective than, any other kind of getting the word out. But it is a challenge, Sam, because nothing like us exists. There is no such thing as active hydration until FluidLogic invented it. So, category creation is always really, really hard.
Yeah, I'll share something to hopefully resonate with you. So I'm really good friends with the guys at Plunge, who built the big cold plunge company, and they scaled that to almost a 9-figure company now. And they were on this podcast, not long ago, and we talked to them about how they grew their business. And you obviously have a $1,000 product. They have a $5,000 product. They went around and gifted these cold plunges to guys like Andrew Huberman, Tony Hawk, big name celebrities, and then recorded a ton of content with these guys. And then that content went viral, associating themselves with the brand, and then stamped to repeat that process all around the country by just messaging people saying, hey, this is like an awesome tool for you. Have it, try it. Let me know your feedback. Let's make some content. But what I learned about business too is there's really only 4 ways to acquire more customers, right? You can do all this content, a lot of organic content to go out there. Then you have like paid advertising on Meta, Google, wherever you want to go put paid advertising on. Then you can do a bunch of cold outreach as well. You can call a bunch of people, direct cold calling. And then there's a warm outreach, which is more referral based, right? Which is what you're doing today. And having a referral based organic way of growing is obviously the cheapest way to grow as well, but also the way that's going to compound the most of getting your product awareness out there. So I really like that you're doing that. The fact that you can go out there and just gift a very unique product that can add instant feedback. So that loop of feedback is instantaneous, which not many people who are selling product today can offer that. So the more I think you leverage that to your audience or to your customers, I should say, will yield probably the highest returns, because this is a no-brainer for people. So my hat goes off to you for building such an awesome company and a product that's actually making massive impact in this space today, because hydration is everything that makes an athlete a lot more productive, a lot better athlete overall. And I really look at the solutions out there. There's such a massive discrepancy of what's available compared to what's yours.
Yeah, we think so too. Obviously, we think that, there was an opportunity there, and in the end, we were trying to solve a real problem. Our founder had a real problem and this was the solve for that. And I do I appreciate your feedback about, the referral kind of campaigning. We do hope that that's going to be, the most successful way for us to really just show the value, because it does make a huge difference. Hydration does make a huge difference.
Awesome.
It is one of the easiest things to change and see instantaneous results of anything that you can do as an athlete, but it is often not the thing that people do. Everybody knows that they need to drink. Everybody does. I do, you do, non-athlete, high-end athletes do, the whole range spectrum of active people know that to be fit for health and wellness, that they need to stay hydrated. And 75% of all Americans are chronically dehydrated, not just this minute, but like every day.
Yeah.
And so clearly it's a problem across the board. And I think that humans get bored with repeatable, mundane tasks. And so if we can help take that, away from them and, not to be super cheesy, but take the thinking out of drinking, we think that there's a real thing we can offer.
100%. I like that. Take the thinking away from drinking. I'm going to steal that one from you.
Well, you can have my very, gitchy phrase. No problem.
So I want to talk about the business a little more in depth. This is no easy task to go build. You're building product. You're doing mass distributions. You're taking raw materials of finished goods. Our global supply chain minds know how hard that is. Tell me some of the biggest bottlenecks of this business, right? You had to go raise a significant amount of money. I saw you did a $15 million Series A recently. Where is a lot of your time and focus going towards with money allocation, how you're growing the company today?
Yeah. So I guess let me answer easier about, maybe where we've been in the last 6 months to today.
Yeah.
And then kind of what I'm thinking about going forward in the next 6 months. So launching a product is a huge lift.
Yeah.
And, we've been in our iterative cycle of, DVT level products with our, contract manufacturer partners, just to make sure that we're working out all of the technology bugs. And unfortunately, when you're inventing new technology, there are always bugs. And so that's been on the software side, with our app-based tool, but that has also been on the hardware side in terms of making this just really badass system actually work all the time the way that it's supposed to. And so I think that the vast majority of our time has been get a reliable, credible MVP product out the door.
To interject, I'm curious, how many iterations did it take to get an MVP product out there? And then how many iterations did it take to get a final product out there?
I won't speak to before I came. So in January of 2022, I took over as CEO, and we had a multitude of ideation prototypes, pieces of things that kind of worked, and how do we glob those together, and, let's use those. I can't speak intelligently about how many iterations of things that there were at that time. But when I took over in 22, we had probably, 4 to 6 engineering level prototype samples, EVT level products that then moved to, I would say probably about the same, 6 iterations of having a developmental level product that we were working, with our supply chain partners until we got something that we thought was a production level product, a PV level product. And that has another 3 iterations that were specifically done by our supply chain partners, to work out their manufacturing processes and bugs and challenges. And now we have what we call our MVP, and we have launched with that. But we know that we're going to have probably 3 quick turn iterations of that, I would say, in the first 6 months. How do we do just things you don't know that you don't know until you get thousands of people to use the system versus, the internal people using the system. And people who aren't internal people using the system always have different perspectives and mindsets than people internal to the company using the system have. And so I don't know, what's that answer? Like 20, 18, a lot of systems.
One thing I want to underscore here that I think the audience would appreciate if they're out there trying to go build a product and raise money is there's a dichotomy here in the sense that you're raising money. You don't want to overraise too much because if you do, you dilute yourself. And then secondly, you want to make sure that your money is being used for the right things. And then when you're going and doing multiple iterations, you're like, oh my God, it's just not working. This is my 6th round making an MVP. I've just burned $7 million. Am I doing the right thing? And then you have this, inflection moment in your career as a CEO is like, oh my God, do I know what I'm doing? Right? I'm using other people's money right now. This is not working out. And we've all been there as entrepreneurs. If you haven't sat in the dark with your hands on your head, wondering what the fuck you're doing, you haven't really done anything hard enough. That's what I say. So I feel your pain. I've been there. I built product as well. And that is one of the hardest challenges of building a company like yours today. That's, was probably pre-seed VC fundraising to taking a product and launching in the market in a space that's very competitive. Obviously, it's not the easiest to go get a direct to consumer market and drive massive awareness, which is to cause a large amount of campaign, right? So, hey, again, my hat goes off to you for doing that. Hey,
Yeah, Sam, I don't like to think about being in the dark, like crying. But I have, so this is goofy. There has been at least one, I would say probably a couple. I'm a head against the wall, kind of a rester, and like my head in a corner being like, can I do this? Am I out of my element? Like all these people are trusting me, all these people's jobs. Like I have gone through the holy crap. I am in over my head. Am I really? And then, the wake up the next morning and be like, nope, keep going. And I think that the difference between entrepreneurs that make it and entrepreneurs that don't is just that entrepreneurs that make it keep going. And entrepreneurs that don't, just don't. And I know that sounds so simplistic, but perseverance is a gift. And, having the attitude to want to persevere and to always find that path is also a gift. And when I talk about, to my teams or when I do leadership presentations, I talk about the one thing that I think is so critical, true for entrepreneurship, but true for just leadership in general, is this idea of relentless positivity. And that's not reckless enthusiasm. Everything's just going to work out. And it's not fake cheeriness like, oh, I'm in a great mood and everything's amazing, and let's all be happy today. Those are not. Relentless positivity is knowing that you and your team are smart enough and are going to work hard enough to find the path to yes. And what is it that we need to do to figure that out? Not, here's all the reasons why it sucks or all the reasons why it's no, but what are the pivots that we take to keep going to get to this end state, this mission that we're trying to achieve? And I think that mind shift about we can and how can we is critical. And there's been a lot of, iterations of that, right? Henry Ford said it a long time ago. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Either way. General Powell, Colin Powell talked about perpetual optimism is a force multiplier, the same kind of an idea set. Relentless positivity is what I call that. And it's a critical component to the teams that I build and for me personally.
I mean, Sarah, so my job on a day-to-day basis is to hire excellent CEOs. And I can tell you are molded into a CEO role. I know you were a former lieutenant. Define a really good CEO.
Yeah, so I was a lieutenant, but I ended my career as a lieutenant colonel.
There you go.
Which just means that I went through a multitude of leadership training and courses. And I will tell you that I am so thankful to my military service because of what they did to train and teach me really good foundational leadership skills. My suggested style is what I think that the military trains. I think it's also, what the Bible trains, but it's servant leadership. What are you doing to serve? And when I think about table stakes leadership qualities, I will start with how are you serving your team? Not how are they serving you? So how are you providing resources? How are you clearing roadblocks? How are you coaching and mentoring? How are you identifying wins and doubling down on those? Or how are you identifying challenges and, figuring out how to solve through? How are you empowering your team so that they can be really great to do their job? How are you making sure that, the break room's stocked and that the toilet paper rolls are changed and, just basic things, and being willing to dive in and do anything that it takes to take care of your team, I think is important. And I embrace that hugely. So I think the relentless positivity would be a thing. The service component would be a thing. I think it's our job as leaders to provide the why. Simon Sinek talks about this, and I love the old school, TED talk about the why. And it's this mission. It's what's the purpose? And people get inspired by purpose. And it's our job to inspire and motivate to keep them moving forward. And so for FluidLogic, our why is to hydrate humanity. That's it. We want to hydrate humanity. We know what hydration does. We know what it does for us. We know what it does for humans. Majority of our bodies are comprised of water. So obviously you need to take care of this resource and do that. So when we think about we are really making the world a better place by delivering against this product and improving people's, in the moment activities and lives and jobs, but over a longer term, really improving their overall health and wellness, their longevity, their lifespan and activity span longevity. It's impactful. And who's not excited to participate in something that's going to make everybody better at what they do? And by the way, generate wealth while you go. It's like literally capitalism in its ideal state. And so I think also, delivering against the why is a really important thing that we have to do as leaders.
And that makes a really good point, because a lot of people have very good whys. I think you have a fantastic why at FluidLogic. Seems like you put a fantastic team together. The opportunity at hand is massive. You have a huge TAM. But in anything, sometimes you can have all those things, but then the outcome is still not there. And you're still trying to go and understand how to close that gap as much as possible to get to that outcome. How do you ensure that you are on the right path sometimes?
Yeah, so I would say that there's no silver bullet. I'd love to say, here's the prescriptive answer on how to get everything right. That would be so silly because I have not gotten everything right. But so I guess let me go to, 3 things. That's a military thing. We like to talk in threes. So here's my 3 things. Thing 1, I think that I would always, in terms of like how to make sure you're on the right path, I think I would always be assessing the path. And I think it's super valid to be looking in a very discerning fashion about how are things going and what's going well and what's not going well. And take some critical thinking time to evaluate performance. How do we improve? What needs to be cut? How do we pivot? We had this idea that we thought was going to look like this, and then we tested it a little bit, and it turns out it's not like that at all. What do we do now? I think that that's an important thing. And when you have that mindset where you're at least consistently disciplined to evaluate how you're doing and to be really honest about it, it allows you to go faster. That's thing 1. Thing 2, you need to create a culture where it's okay to not get it right. It's, again, overused, but this idea of failing fast and failing often, that doesn't mean like I've just destroyed the company and we've gone out of business and let me try and do that every week. But it means more that we're going to try and test an idea in a safe fashion and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we're going to say, well, okay, that didn't work, but that was a good idea. And then we're going to move on to the next thing. And we're going to move on to the next thing. We're not going to get stuck on, sunk costs. I've spent all this money in it, so I have to figure out how to make it work. We're not going to get stuck on old thinking ideas. Well, I was positive it was going to be like this. And so we're just going to keep charging down the same road. You have to be able to fail and move on. And so that would be the second thing. And then the third thing is that you have to be so critical about the team. In reality, my job is relatively easy. Once I have a team in place, that's spectacular. And it's that team that's going to execute against this mission. So you need 2 things when you're building a team. You need people who have exactly the right skills, doing exactly the same thing that you need done, right? So it doesn't help if you have somebody who's really great at developing prototypes, if you need to scale to repeatable at quantity, product, because they know how to make a prototype, but they don't know how to make multi-million time and time iterative product. Those are not the same skills typically in the same person. And you need to know that. And so just because you've got a brilliant person here doesn't mean they're the right person to take you through the scale. And you have to be honest about that. And the second thing is with people, competency, skills, but character. So there's nothing worse in terms of ruining a vision or a mission set for where a company can go than a, toxic environment or a hostile environment, or just this is no fun to be here because people are crappy. You really need to have people who you can trust that they're going to be amazing in their job so that I can be amazing in my job. You need to be like, who do you want to go to battle with? And, I want this. I trust and respect this person who's next to me. I might not always agree with them. We might have different approaches, but I trust and respect this person next to me. And I think that that's equally important to having the right skills. So those would be my 3. Always evaluate, be willing to fail, and build a freaking amazing team, and then let them go.
We actually share a very same mindset about this. So I think when you're hiring someone, especially on your C-suite team or whoever else may be, you're really measuring two things. You're measuring their character and their skills. And then I've always been asked, they're like, Sam, if you had a 10 out of 10 skill set, but a 7 out of 10, 7 out of 10 character, maybe the deficit there is that he's not that very honest with you. How would you address that? And that was one of the most challenging questions at first when it first came about me. And I said, look, I'd rather actually have someone who's a 10 out of 10 character and who's a 7 out of 10 on skill set. Yeah, I can take that 7 to a 9, but it's really hard to go take a 7 to a 10 on the character score.
Agreed.
It's in their innate ability to understand whether they're a good, honest person or not. It's hard to actually mold someone who's, dishonest from the get-go.
Yeah, Sam. So I totally agree. And in fact, if I had to think about personal failings of mine where I haven't gotten things right, it's waiting too long, knowing that somebody's character is not going to be what we need it to be and letting bad things happen because of that, thinking that I need this skill set or I need to have time to replace the skill set or, let me help coach them out of this or like waiting too long in that has really been a lesson learned for me that you just can't do.
How have you been able to cut the cord a lot faster?
Well, I think I'm a lot more honest about the reality of the situation versus just trying to put the rosy glasses on. I am a perseverance person and I'm a problem solver. So a weakness of mine is thinking that I'm going to be able to make anything work. I can figure that out. I can make that work. And sometimes that's just not the case. And so, acknowledging and recognizing that is probably one of the first things that I've done that's helped me do that. And then the second is, you have this awesome team for a reason. And it's not just what my interaction is with a person, it's what the team's interaction is with a person. And so really, trusting, respecting, accepting the feedback of, peers and or subordinate teammates, to what might be a challenging character problem allows me to go faster that way as well.
That's awesome. I think we share a lot of the same values, and I think you're on the path of building a fantastic company. Sarah, I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions as we wrap up this podcast, if that's cool.
Okay, I'll do my best.
No pressure. Whose social media account do you find most entertaining today?
I try very hard to stay off social media as much as possible. So ask me what book I'm reading and I'll tell you.
What book are you reading right now?
I just finished reading The History of Scotland. And my husband and I are going on a trip to Scotland this summer. So like a nerd, I was like, I should know the history of Scotland. So I just read a history book. And then I am currently reading a fiction book about the bookseller of Inverness because we're going to spend part of our trip in Inverness.
I love that. You're the first to deviate away from the social media side and pick a great book. So I commend you for that. Money's not an issue. What company are you buying today?
Pick a application-focused AI or robotics company.
Okay.
But they have to be solving a real problem, not just doing foundational research related to either of those functions, but an business application for robotics or for AI.
Thinking ahead, I like that. What is one tool or resource you cannot live without? And it can't be FluidLogic.
My Bible.
Okay.
But if you want more business focused, I will say my calendar. I cannot live without my calendar. I live and breathe and function based on what comes next.
Who has been the most influential person in your life from a business sense and then from a personal sense?
Well, I will say that my parents were really influential in both. My father is a retired Army officer, so I grew up as a military brat, and he taught me about integrity, honesty, and taking care of your team from the beginning. And my mother was the military spouse that managed life because the military member was managing the military. And she was incredibly powerful that way. And she taught me strength and reckless independence. Strength, confidence, and reckless independence. And I think foundationally, I have been able to morph those things and refine those things over time, but they are just fundamental, to who I am. So I would say probably they've been the biggest influence, in my life. I think if I had to sit down with a business leader or business executive and have lunch with somebody, who would I want to do that with? I would probably pick General C.Q. Brown. General Brown and I were stationed at Shaw Air Force Base at the same time when I was a lieutenant, and he was a lieutenant colonel flying F-16s. But watching his career progress over time and then culminate as it has, as where he sat at the chairman has just been exciting to watch. And I'd love to, sit and chat with him again.
That's awesome. What's the dream outcome for you in FluidLogic today?
Dream outcomes, scale the heck out of this thing to the point where when people think about hydration, they don't think about hydration, they think about FluidLogic. Like nobody thinks about copies they thought about Xerox, and people
Kleenex.
didn't think about, I need a tissue. They said, where's a Kleenex? I need my FluidLogic, or I didn't get my FluidLogic done today, or I don't have my FluidLogic with me, or that would be the ideal state for me.
Building a brand. I love that. Sarah, where can people find out more about you and FluidLogic today?
Yeah, so we're at www.fluidlogic.com, and we've got all of the company information. You can, research and purchase products there. You can see about some of the cool stuff we're doing on the military and the industrial safety side. We've got a really cool product launching in about, I would say, the next quarter. So stay tuned for that. It'll be our third MVP product that comes out this year. Opens the aperture a little bit to a broader user base.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time, Sarah.
Sam, it's been great talking to you. Thanks so much.